Thank you for joining, dear viewers. You are watching OBN Horn of Africa. This is Future Africa program, and I am Pantam Balatek hosting the program. Today, I'm joined by Mohammedawel Ahmed, lawyer from Pimpine City, Ethiopia. Till the end of our program, stay with us. Welcome to the program, and thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Why is the issue of Nile River becoming complex and contentious?
Nile River is the longest river in the world, as you know, running about 7 kilometers. Nile or Laga Abaya in Afan Oromo or Abai Wanz in Amharic is the largest and major transboundary water in the globe. So Nile River is the confluence of Blue Nile that comes from tributaries in Ethiopia, around 86% of contribution coming from Blue Nile in Ethiopia, and White Nile stemming from Lake Victoria in Uganda. In spite of the fact that Nile and its tributaries flow through 11 countries like Burundi, DRC, Kenya, Rwanda, etc., it's a home to well over 350 million people living around the river. Egypt and Sudan, while contributing 0% to the water, uses vast majority of the water from the time immemorial. And of course, Nile has remained to be a lifeline to millions living in Egypt and beyond. Therefore, the fact that Nile River is a lifeblood for the people who live around it makes the cooperation and interaction among the riparian countries so complex and usually contentious. To put it in another word, Nile is extremely sensitive legally, geopolitically, and security-wise. For instance, just to explain some of the instances how it became so contentious, in 1979, the late Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, in one occasion, have said that the only matter that could take Egypt to war again is water. In the same vein, few years later in 1988, Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Minister, the famous Boutros Ghali, also predicted that the next war in the Middle East would be fought over waters of Nile and not politics. Therefore, the importance that this river has to the people living around it and to the countries it crosses makes it so important and usually contentious, I would say.
How can existing usage of Nile River be explained in relation to the 1929 and 1959 colonial treaties?
Relation to the usage of River Nile, as you have mentioned, we do have a number of treaties, colonial treaties. To be specific, with regard to the use of River Nile, there is a huge imbalance as the lower riparian countries utilizes most of the river. By lower riparian countries, we are referring basically to Egypt and Sudan. At the beginning of the 21st century, Ethiopia uses like less than 1% of the basin's water, while Egypt uses 80% of the water while contributing nothing to the resource. And according to the World Bank, for instance, in 1997, the waters of the Nile probably constitutes Ethiopia's greatest natural asset for development. However, despite the fact that Nile constitutes one of the greatest natural assets for Ethiopia for its development, Ethiopia still uses almost 0% from the resource it contributes to the water. And for the past 200 years, numerous interested parties, the majority of whom were representatives of colonial powers, have negotiated themselves about the rights and ownership of the Nile waters in the spirit of the 1984, the 1985 Berlin Conference. And since all of those actors were colonial powers, all previous negotiations and agreements that arose out of those deliberations and negotiations and treaties were biased in favor of the downstream countries' interest, and such agreements have resulted in a varying degrees of tension and hostility among the riparian countries. For instance, to mention some of those colonial treaties, as you have mentioned, we have the Anglo-Egyptian Agreement of 1929. It's an agreement made between the former colony and Egypt. We do have also another treaty, a tripartite treaty of 1906, signed between Great Britain, France, and Italy. And we do have also another agreement or treaty, colonial treaty, signed in 1959 between Egypt and Sudan. Common to all, the common denominator to all the above mentioned treaties is that the above all agreements, and under the above agreements, only Egypt and Sudan were legally recognized for the use and ownership of the Nile waters. In terms of agreement, for instance, Egypt would be allocated a lion's share of the available water resources, that is 55.5 billion cubic meters of the Nile water, while Sudan was allocated with 18.5 billion cubic meter from the entire water resource of the Nile River. So there was a huge imbalance between the downstream and upper riparian states in terms of utilizing this huge resource.
Now let's talk about the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Why is GERD becoming a bone of contention, starting from the local media to international media and institutions, including UN Security Council?
Nile has already become an issue of global concern, particularly after 2011. In 2011, Ethiopia announced its plan of building a huge dam, that's GERD, Great Ethiopia Renaissance Dam, the largest hydroelectric dam in the continent, with a power of generating around 6,450 megawatts. And even though the tension among the riparian countries over Nile basin dates back to many decades, however, the commencement of this project have revived the old tension with its fellow riparian states, notably Sudan and Egypt, and has put the spotlight back on the delicate issues of the legal regime governing Nile River and the basin in general. On June 2020, Egypt referred the matter to the United Nations Security Council under Article 35 of the United Nations Charter, which allows member states to alert the Security Council to act to any updates that might threaten the international peace and security. Accordingly, under Article 35, the matter was referred to the Council, and the matter was explained to the Council as a matter that threatens international peace and order, as explained by Sami Shukri, the Egyptian foreign minister. Following Egypt's referral of the matter to the UN Security Council, the matter soon turned out to be a subject of politico-legal debate in the international forums and medias. For instance, in September 2021, the United Nations Security Council has adopted a draft statement or a declaration, we can say, encouraging the two states, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt, to resume talks and negotiate under the regional organization, the African Union, and to swiftly conclude a deal on Ethiopia's controversial mega dam on the Nile River. And the declaration goes on to the extent of mentioning that the settlement should be made, or the settlement should be a mutually acceptable and a binding agreement should be reached on the filling and operation of the GERD of the dam, within reasonable framework. The declaration goes on to state. And consequently, in a statement attributed to the Ethiopian foreign minister on the same date, Ethiopia announced that it will continue the construction and filling of the dam with or without an agreement, and that they will not beg to use their water resources. Consequently, a social media campaign burst out, a campaign started and under the theme #It'sMyDam. A social media campaign, #It'sMyDam, flooded all social media platforms. Therefore, the relevance and the importance of Nile River has went to the extent of inviting international actors and international organizations, including the UN Security Council, to act so that the riparian countries would not go or would not confront each other in the process of utilizing this common and shared natural resource.
Can you explain the legal issues behind the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, especially in relation with Egypt's claim of natural and historical rights over Nile River, please?
With regard to the underlying legal issues behind GERD and Nile River, basically there are two arguments, legal bases underlying the issue of GERD. One argument pertains to a claim for natural and historical rights over Nile River. The other school of thought pertains to equitable and reasonable utilization of natural resources. The second view is usually propagated by upper riparian countries, notably by Ethiopia, while an argument of natural and historical rights over Nile River is usually advanced by lower riparian countries and basically by Egypt. The downstream nations usually insisted on maintaining their historical and natural rights, the so-called historical and natural rights, on the basis of colonial and unilateral agreements made. This is based on, the principle of prior appropriation, which enshrine the principle of first come, first served. But this doctrine has had limited acceptance in the contemporary international law discourses, such as the international law on non-navigational uses of international water courses, as adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1997, and the Helsinki rules and the 1961 Salzburg Resolution on the use of international non-maritime waters, and the 1972 Stockholm Declaration on Human Environment, all are against the principle of historical and natural rights over a certain resource. On the other hand, the most accepted principle when it comes to utilizing shared natural resource is equitable and reasonable utilization of shared natural resources, including Nile water. The upstream countries, on the other hand, have asserted their sovereign right, and under the principle of equitable utilization, they have asserted their sovereign right to utilize water resource and Nile water equitably, so long as the water comes from their territory and flows through their territorial jurisdiction. And this agreement is basically based on the premises that upper riparian states are not a party to the colonial agreements that we have listed before. Again, in defense of this principle, we do have various international laws that supports, the advancement of the above stated principle, equitable and reasonable utilization of shared natural resources. For instance, under Article 9, the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaty provides that adoption of the text of a certain treaty takes place by the consent of all the states participating in its drawing up. In another word, with regard to a certain treaties, third parties, not a party to that treaty, cannot be tied, cannot be obliged to observe the text of that treaty to which they are not a party. In another word, a certain treaty creates neither rights nor obligations for a third state that is not a party to it, as encapsulated under Article 11 of the Vienna Convention. To that end, we can, or at least I can plausibly argue that, speaking of the law governing treaties, the 1929 colonial treaty made on Nile River, or the 1959 colonial agreement made on the Nile River, cannot be evoked by the downstream countries against other riparian states that were not a party to those agreements, I would say. Else, apart from the laws we have mentioned, the standard principle of state succession under international law or under public international law also militates against the principle of historical and natural rights over a certain natural resource or over a Nile River. Many of those countries today invoke the principle, and I mean another principle, the so-called Nyerere doctrine, which holds that colonial agreements are null and void, except they enshrine accepted principles required by international. The Nyerere doctrine is a re-articulation of the older and well-accepted tabula rasa doctrine, under which successor states do not inherit obligations arising out of a certain treaties concluded by their predecessors. Instead, they can avail themselves against any obligation that could permanently hinder their right over a certain natural resource. Indeed, the 1979 Vienna Convention on the succession of states in respect of treaties enshrines this doctrine, this tabula rasa doctrine, in which a state cannot inherit an obligation assumed by their predecessors.
How does international law regulate the same issues? Do we have a case law or a lesson to derive from other jurisdictions?
Yes, we do have laws, but they are not as binding as other international laws. In a way, they are soft laws. For instance, we have the 1997 UN Water Courses Convention, which establishes for a framework for the utilization, development, conservation, etc. of international water courses, whilst promoting optimal and sustainable utilization of the water for present and future generations. And then it also upholds some of the special needs and interests of developing countries, which is particularly relevant for riparian states, for Nile riparian states. Generally, the body of water law governing international freshwater river basins is relatively new and less developed. To be precise, the Convention on the Law of Non-Navigational Uses of International Water Courses, adopted by the UN General Assembly in May 1997, is very weak. Therefore, many countries surrounding international river usually tends to disagree about water law, and Nile Basin is no exception. Equally, we do have the Helsinki Rules and the 1961 Salzburg Resolution on the use of international maritime waters, which are equally not binding, but have some sort of normativity in guiding the usage and operation of international water resource utilizations. Concerning the case laws, we do have cases that went to the international courts, to the international forums, and that has been litigated on. To mention one, we do have a case between Hungary and Slovakia. The case is notably known as the Gabčíkovo-Nejmaros case. In 1997, Hungary and Czechoslovakia signed a treaty obligating the states to cooperate in the construction of a system of dams and locks along the section of the Danube River. And this river forms a border, between the two states. And the construction of the dam was commenced in 1978, but its progress was slowed down due to the then economic turmoil and political upheaval. Then in 1989, Hungary abandoned the project, justifying its decision on the claims of changed circumstances and impossibility of progress. In 1991, Czechoslovakia has separated into two nation states, Republic of Czech and Slovakia. Then Slovakia assumed its predecessor's responsibilities under the treaty because the planned hydraulic system fell within its territorial boundary. Finally, the matter was taken to the International Court of Justice in 1994, and the court has ruled that Slovak, by putting a variant into the operation and unilaterally taking control of the shared natural resource, had violated international law in the 1977 treaty, that is the UN Convention on International Transboundary Water Resources. Therefore, I would say we do have case laws and practices to drive from other states and other jurisdictions so that we can use this shared natural resource, Nile River, in a way that can benefit both upper and lower riparian states, I would say.
Have you got any concluding remarks before we move on to Ethiopia's assertion to access to seaports, please?
Yes, finally, I would say, shared natural resources, as its name suggests, are assets for all, and it needs to be utilized in a fairly manner. I would argue that the softness of international water law in regulating natural resources or a specific water body and the one-sided colonial era treaties as usually evoked by downstream countries, nor the absence of a binding international agreement or a binding agreement between both countries shall give a way to a winner or loser scenario. Look, at least the noblest doctrines and principles under international law that are scattered here and there throughout the corpus of various instruments. For instance, we do have a principle of fair and equitable utilization of natural resources. We do have a principle that states, duty not to cause significant harm. We do have also a principle that provides for a duty to cooperate, and we do have also a principle that states for rights of states to development, etc. And those principles are encapsulated under various corpus of international law. For instance, under the 1992 Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, under the 1993 Vienna Declaration on Program of Action, or under the 1972 Stockholm Declaration on Human Environment, among other instruments, can be used in addressing the matter under consideration, in addressing issues arising among the upper and downstream countries of the Nile River, I would say. Therefore, instead of sticking to the old colonial agreements that does not accommodate the legitimate interests of all riparian states, I would suggest that law riparian states, particularly Egypt and Sudan, can lawfully, what they can lawfully do is to demand Ethiopia and other upper riparian states to ensure that any prospective projects, development projects on Nile River does not pose significant harm to their interest or to downstream countries. I recommend that the modern day undertakings, made between Nile riparian states, such as the 1991 framework for general cooperation signed between Egypt and Ethiopia, the 2010 Comprehensive Framework Agreement, notably known as CFA, and the 1915 Declaration of Principles among the three countries, need to be abided by all state parties to the document, for they are reflective of the fundamental principles leading to a fair and equitable utilization of Nile riparian countries by all states and peoples living around the river.
How did you see Ethiopia's recent assertion regarding access to seaports?
I think Ethiopia's recent assertion or declaration of interest towards having an access to the sea is informed by it's a sovereign and a natural right to have an access to the sea, and it's partly informed by the principles under the international law of the sea. Law of the sea being a body of customs, treaties, and international agreements, it aims at maintaining order, productivity, and peaceful relation of states on a sea, okay, on the sea. So law of the sea, it basically intends at advancing a country's right for its ships to pass through the territorial seas of foreign states and straits used for international navigations. And those seas and straits, international seas and straits, can also serve as a foundation for much of the world's economy and can be used for a significant portion of the country's economy, supporting sectors from tourism to fisheries to international shipping. So Ethiopia's recent assertion and declaration of intent towards having an access to sea is informed by its a sovereign and natural right to have an access to a sea, so that its economic endeavors, sectors ranging from tourism, fishery to international shipping, can be maintained. So basically, international law of the sea is governed by three principles. One is the principle of freedom, the other is principle of sovereignty, and principle of common heritage of mankind. So I would say, in light of the fact that seas are common heritage of mankind and Ethiopia retains a sovereign right to access a sea, the recent statement by the PM is an excellent move, I would say, very bold, and in a way, a roller coaster also, I would say. Therefore, I recommend that we can advance this claim or this interest. And the most important thing for me is to devise for a mechanism through which we can achieve what we want in the spirit of mutual benefit, fraternity, and peaceably with the neighboring peoples and states. To the best of my knowledge, the PM in his recent statement never made a referral to a specific port or country when he makes a claim of accessing a sea. However, probably due to the historical ties that we had with Eritrea and our peculiar attachment with Port Asab, people's might have, the idea of Port Asab might have crossed people's mind, maybe for all practical reasons. However, as you have mentioned, we do have many alternatives when it comes to accessing a sea. We do have many ports that are even much closer than Assab for us to utilize. And in every sense of the term, in terms of proximity, in terms of cost, in terms of historical antecedents, we do have other ports that we can think of. We do have other leverage through which we can navigate whenever we think of having an access to the sea. Concerning the manner how Ethiopia can get access, the manner of getting an access to a certain port or access to the sea can be different. It can be through renting, or it can be through buying ports, or it can be through making some form of concession, or you can say it, through give and take form. You can make some form of concession with a certain state, so that we can have an uninterrupted access to a sea, and in return they will get something from Ethiopia. For instance, we can have an arrangements like we can exempt, for instance, some of the products coming from Djibouti or Somali. We can make some of their products tax-free, tax exemption can be placed. Or we can give some, or a plot, an arable land to Djibouti, to Somali, to Kenya, or to Somaliland, or to probably to Eritrea also, so that in return or in exchange, we can have an uninterrupted access to the sea. So the most important thing, I would say, in advancing your claim is to assert your right peaceably in such a way that never poses a sense of threat to the states and to the people with whom you are planning to negotiate. I would say that is the most important thing. Thank you very much.
Mohammedawel Ahmed, lawyer from Fafana City. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Dear our esteemed viewers, this is all we have for today. Thank you for watching.